A French family, parents and a child, arrived in Canada. They sat on a Canadian public bus with trepidation. Inside the crowded vehicle, their dark-skinned son suddenly began to cry loudly. The father, tormented by the gazes of those around him and old emotional wounds, felt intense anxiety. He tried with all his might to calm his son down. At that moment, a Canadian couple told them something that left the French family in shock. What happened to them? My name is Nicholas. I am French, and I am 30 years old. Currently, I live in France with my wife and 3-year-old son. I met my wife when I was working in Russia, and we eventually got married. I work as a journalist and travel all over the world, basing myself in France. Due to the nature of my job, I often have to travel abroad, and I have visited many countries such as Spain and Italy. Learning new languages and cultures in the countries where I work is always a challenge, especially when facing a language barrier. But when I manage to communicate or meet kind locals, I feel the joy of being in that country. That is why I love my job so much. But to be honest, I never want to return to Russia. There, my wife, who is black, and I encountered racism and went through a very unpleasant experience. I first went to Russia 5 years ago, and it was my first trip to Eastern Europe. I traveled there with mixed feelings of anticipation and anxiety. Fortunately, the branch office there had employees of various nationalities, and we mainly communicated in English, so there were no language problems. I was even able to learn the Russian language to the level of daily conversation in a few months. Thanks to the multinational team at work, I hardly felt any racism. My wife had been assigned to work in Russia before me, and our relationship started there. Soon we began dating, got married, and our son was born. My work, although stressful, was fulfilling, and I lived a full life with my beloved family. I remember well how happy our family was in Russia during that period. The terrible experience happened on one of the weekends when we went out for a walk. We planned to go to a large park with spacious lawns. This park was a popular place where many families came for picnics and to play badminton on weekends. I learned about this from colleagues and immediately decided to go there. From our house to the park, we had to take a bus for about 30 minutes from the station. That day, we prepared lunch boxes and a picnic mat and were ready to leave from the morning. The bus was crowded with people heading to the park, but since we lined up in advance, we got seats. I put my son on my lap, and we set off for the long-awaited park with excitement. After we sat down, people kept coming in until the bus was packed. After a while, I noticed an elderly couple standing in the aisle in front of us, looking at us with a stern gaze. Their stares were so heavy that I wondered if something was wrong. But we weren't doing anything bad, so I didn't understand the reason. Then I heard them start whispering quietly, but since the bus was quite quiet, I clearly heard their conversation. "Why are blacks sitting while we are standing? This is Russia. Russians should have priority." Hearing this, I was shocked. I never expected to hear such racist words right to my face. My wife also heard this conversation. She lowered her head in sadness. Thinking that the people around us might feel the same way, I felt intense discomfort. Then my son started to get fussy due to the tightness in the crowded bus and the stuffy air. I worried that he would start crying loudly, especially fearing criticism from people like that elderly couple. What kind of parents can't calm a child? Probably because they are black. We did everything possible to calm our son, and eventually he quieted down and fell asleep. But then we heard the words of that elderly couple again. I wish they would get off soon. Riding in the same bus with blacks is terrible. This first experience of racism in Russia was a real shock to me. They probably thought we didn't understand Russian since they allowed themselves to speak like that. But even if we didn't understand the language, no one has the right to say words that hurt others. The truth is that we understood Russian, and these words left a deep wound in our hearts. Even in France, I have encountered racism, but it is impossible to get used to it. Every such encounter is like a new wound. The trip to the park that day was hopelessly ruined. Since our son was still small, my wife and I tried to stay cheerful, but facing direct racism, which was so different from the experience at work, shook us to the core. And similar incidents happened more than once. For example, one day when we went to a shopping mall near our house, we entered a clothing store. While we were choosing clothes, I heard a couple in their 30s whispering while pointing at us. Are blacks really going to buy something here? It won't suit them anyway. Hearing this, we were speechless and eventually left the store without buying anything. Since then, we started avoiding shopping in regular stores and switched to online shopping because at least there you don't face criticism to your face. Life in Russia, although rarely accompanied by direct attacks, was often filled with humiliating remarks spoken behind our backs but within earshot, so we understood everything. This assignment made me painfully realize that racism towards black people exists in Eastern Europe, and I never wanted to return to Russia again. Our family no longer thought about traveling to that region. But then something amazing happened. We got an opportunity to go to Canada. The fact is that my boss won airline tickets to Canada in a lottery, but due to business, he couldn't go. So he gave these tickets to us. When we received this offer, we hesitated for a long time, especially remembering our terrible experience in Russia. The anxiety about traveling abroad to a new place had not yet subsided. The experience on the bus and in the clothing store, where we were treated badly just because of skin color, was hard to forget. But the boss encouraged us. Russia and Canada are different countries. When I was there, it seemed to me that Canada is a wonderful country. Nevertheless, I was still worried because my boss is white. Could his experience be the same as ours? In my eyes then, foreign countries felt risky. But the boss insisted, "You will definitely like Canada." After these words, we finally decided to go to Canada with the whole family. When I told my wife about this at home, she also doubted at first, but seeing that it was the boss's recommendation, she eventually agreed. After that, we started preparing for the trip to Canada. We looked up some information about interesting attractions, but even before departure, we were still full of anxiety. However, when we arrived in Canada, all our worries turned out to be in vain. On the first day of our arrival, we decided to take our son, who loves animals, to the zoo, as we heard there were many rare animals there. From the hotel where we stayed, we had to take a public bus to the zoo. Memories of the bus in Russia immediately surfaced in my mind. The fear and anxiety that we would be humiliated again because of skin color flooded back. But for the sake of our son who loves animals, we decided to get on the bus. Upon boarding, we immediately faced a small problem. We were not familiar with the payment system and didn't know how much to pay. There was a line of other passengers outside who were also going to the zoo, making us even more nervous. At that moment, I was afraid we would be yelled at for being slow. But then something unexpected happened. A Canadian man standing in line behind us kindly told us how to pay the fare properly. With his help, we safely boarded the bus. I, using English, thanked him. "Thank you." At that moment, I realized that kind people still exist, and I calmed down a little. But when we entered the bus, another trial awaited us. That day, the bus was crowded. We had to stand the whole way, holding on to the handrails while the bus swayed. I hugged my son tightly, worrying that he would get upset and cry in such a tight space. And, as expected, after a while, my son began to cry. My son's crying echoed through the quiet bus, making us worry and feel nervous that we were bothering other passengers. When my son wouldn't calm down, we began to seriously think about getting off at the next stop. But at that moment, a young Canadian couple approached us. "If you don't mind, please sit here," they said. They stood up and gave up their seats to us. We were simultaneously surprised and grateful for their kindness and accepted their offer. This couple also showed interest in my son. "How cute! How old is he?" they asked in friendly English. We talked a little with them, and before we knew it, my son had stopped crying. This experience made a huge impression on us with its kindness and humanity. Both the person who helped us with payment, the couple who gave up their seat, and the other passengers who didn't say a word of reproach when my son cried. The actions of all these people sank deep into our souls. When we got off the bus, that couple waved to my son, and he happily waved back to them. At first, we were afraid that we would cause inconvenience to others, but in reality, it turned out to be completely the opposite. Since that incident, my wife and I constantly encountered the warmth of Canadian people and realized that among Western countries, Canada is a country that is especially merciful. Subsequently, throughout our journey in Canada, we often met the warm kindness of locals at various tourist spots. For example, one day when we were having lunch at a restaurant, my son accidentally spilled water on the table. While we were hurriedly trying to wipe everything up, Canadians sitting at the next table came over and actively helped us. Such a soulful act made a huge impression on us, and we were sincerely grateful for the culture of mutual assistance, devoid of racial prejudice. My wife and I even said later that if this had happened in Russia, we would probably have been yelled at. Another time, when we were in a souvenir shop, I accidentally left my smartphone on a shelf. When I was already about to leave the store, a Canadian woman noticed this and rushed to return the smartphone to me. This experience became another opportunity to feel the kindness of Canadian people, which is so different from what happens in France, where if you lose something, it will likely be ignored. Or in the worst case, someone will take it for themselves without trying to find the owner. But in Canada, as it seemed to me, there are many people ready to do the right thing without hesitation. Such actions, like selfless help to others without thoughts of gain, made a huge impression on me, showing the character of Canadian people. We also had the opportunity to visit the CN Tower and the waterfront area in Toronto. Their magnificence and charm left a completely different impression on my soul. The lively streets in this area, the exquisite modern architecture, and the multitude of people became a source of novelty and delight for me. The time spent there allowed me to feel a cultural fusion where traditions and modernity meet, creating unforgettable memories. The majesty of Casa Loma, the liveliness of the Eaton Centre, and the tranquility of Lake Ontario, these diverse landscapes showed me another side of the city's history. Especially the historic atmosphere of the old buildings, which invites visitors on a journey through time and cultural depth, was forever imprinted in my heart. There we saw many local crafts and traditional Canadian foods, which allowed us to truly feel the richness of the culture. Furthermore, walking along the harborfront with a view of the city skyline made an impression on me with its beauty, where the old and new in Toronto harmoniously combine. Walking around the city in that area was like a real journey into the depths of Canadian culture. Walks around historical buildings and visiting traditional shops and stalls allowed us to immerse ourselves in a unique atmosphere where history and modern culture of Canada intertwine. This overflowing beauty made a huge impression on me, especially the interaction with locals, which allowed me to directly feel the warm hospitality of Canadian people and their openness to guests. This trip to Canada became an invaluable opportunity for our entire family to feel the warmth and unbiased attitude of the locals. We realized that Canadian people treat everyone with kindness, regardless of skin color, and we were sincerely impressed by this attitude. Especially my wife and I, thanks to this experience, were imbued with a deep love for Canadian people. In fact, my wife started planning the next trip to Canada as soon as we returned home. We are especially grateful that there was no discrimination or criticism, which we encountered in Russia. Previously, we looked stereotypically at foreign countries and mistakenly believed that in Canada there would also be racism. But this trip completely destroyed that stereotype. We are very grateful to our boss for giving us the opportunity to make this journey. His prediction that you will definitely like Canada turned out to be surprisingly true. And when we returned and told him about our wonderful experience, he smiled with satisfaction. And we decided to live just like the Canadians we met, to be merciful to everyone, without prejudice. We thank from the bottom of our hearts that the meeting with Canadian people had such a beneficial influence on us.